The Supreme Court has upheld a Tennessee law banning puberty blockers and hormone therapy for transgender teenagers. The court said the law does not violate the 14th Amendment right of equal protection. The Tennessee law does allow children access to these medical treatments for other purposes, but not for gender dysphoria. More than 20 other states have similar laws. So with this court's decision, Nina, is this now a tipping point away from this sort of move for more transgender rights and the transitions?
Yeah, I think that it is a move away from rights for transgender issues. And here's why I say that. If we set aside the particulars of this case itself, there's sort of a constitutional foundation that the court has laid for a rollback to come later on. First and foremost is just the really unusual reasoning that the Tennessee law, which targeted transgender youth, is not discriminatory. And the court said it's not discriminatory because it applies to all youth, to both biologically born men or males as well as females. And so that to me is sort of odd because secondly, it ignores what most can presume to be the intent behind this law, that the law was intended to focus specifically on transgenders. But more than both of those things is this. The court has said that transgenders are not a protected class that is entitled to heightened judicial scrutiny as are other marginalized groups. And so for the court to say that really sets up rolling back the rights in other areas.
Sarah?
Yeah, and I guess I would say that the court is kind of in line, unfortunately, with public opinion on this issue. There is actually quite a lot of public support for certain transgender rights, including banning job discrimination. It's like plus 33, serving in the military, very popular. Even gender-neutral bathrooms, requiring those in public buildings is a positive in terms of public opinion. The public is really not there yet on transitioning puberty blockers and hormone treatments for young people. And oftentimes it's due to partly, I think, children, this idea of children, and that they, that we're worried about children and the kinds of decisions that they need parents and other people to help make these decisions. And I have a lot of sympathy for these families and for these children who really feel like they're in the wrong body, and you want to be able to give them that opportunity. And that decision should not be made by state legislatures based on, frankly, bigotry.
But it should be made by the medical community. And what bothers me about this is what I think at core should be a medical issue has become a political one.
Yeah.
On the far right, clearly don't even want people to be able to choose their own pronouns that they use. The left, on the other hand, in support of transgenders' rights in general, has now chosen this as sort of a litmus test. And so what happens is we've got both sides pulling, and this issue on what I think is somewhat controversial. It doesn't appear that the medical evidence is as strong as it appears to be. And reading things on both about the Alabama and the Tennessee case show that there's been some overreaching. When parents are being told, "Oh, your boy is showing these issues. Would you rather have a daughter that's alive or a son that's dead?" Pressuring them using the threat of suicide when it turns out there was no increased risk of suicide. Just people, really.
And the court was very strong on that,
Yes.
about the medical evidence apparently is not what people had been led to believe.
And so what this case was actually about was who gets to decide. Is it the courts or is it the democratic process? And I'm firmly of the belief that when it is, as between the two of those, when you have a situation where the medical evidence, where medical experts are in disagreement, the court got it right. It does not belong in the courts. The court should not be making this call.
Well, here's the other thing is one would assume that it should be parents. I mean, given the fact that the medical community is very much divided, the court said absolutely nothing, actually, not very little, but nothing about parental rights, parents' rights to decide whether or not their child should receive this sort of medical treatment and the denial of due process on that basis. And I guess the other thing I would add is that seems to contradict where the court and conservatives are in other areas whereby they argue that parents should be told by schools that their child is identifying with a gender other than how they were born. And so the court's reasoning here was all over the place, but I find a lot of information in the concurrences. And there, Justice Alito was very matter of fact in saying, this is not grounds for the court to intervene, as Lisa said, because there's no discrimination here and transgenders are not a special class.
So this law was about children, teenagers and children, but there's some concern among some advocates that this could affect possible banning of treatments for adults. Is that a legitimate concern?
I mean, not based on this decision.
No?
No, because in fact, when in rejecting the argument that this law discriminated based on sex, which would have resulted in the law being subjected to greater scrutiny, perhaps being struck down as unconstitutional, the court led with the argument that this law distinguishes based on age, and medical purpose or medical use. And that's how the court countered that argument. So it's very clear that age, is the sort of centerpiece.
But I think the concern is going back to what Nina said, which is that they did say transgender people are not a protected class. I think that's where some of the concern comes from. If they're not considered a protected class, could that affect other cases?
That gets to the question as to whether even bringing this case,
Right.
ACLU brought this case, set back.
Yeah,
that-
always a risk.
I think it was very risky legal strategy. I mean, the LGBTQ movement has used the law in courts pretty effectively, but the difference is there were some backlash too against the early marriage equality cases. And so they went back to the drawing board and really tried to shape and persuade public opinion, to get public opinion to support, to normalize it, to tell stories and narratives so that people can relate to LGBTQ people and their wishes and dreams. I think they did not do this. They got too far ahead of public opinion. You have to be a little ahead of public opinion, but as Sarah McBride said, she's the first transgender person, you have to keep it within arm's length.